In June 2010, an email landed in Dairo Rua's inbox. Dairo was getting a lot of emails those days. He was the leader of the miners' union at Frontino Gold Mines, the company that for 150 years had run the massive underground mines the town of Segovia was built around. And at that moment, Dairo and the union were fighting to stop Frontino being sold off to a foreign multinational.
Ya ha llegado a mi correo electrónico una amenaza donde nos decían que teníamos que renunciar irnos del pueblo si no nos declararan objetivo militar.
The email said that he and the other leaders should stop opposing the sale of Frontino, resign from the union and leave Segovia, Dairo told us. If they did not, it said, they would be declared military targets. The union leaders were used to receiving threats. Ever since they started pushing back on the sale and instead trying to reclaim the company for the Frontino workers and pensioners, they'd been getting phone calls, emails and texts with the same general tone and message. And those were just the latest chapter in a decades-long fight over Frontino, its mines and Segovia's gold. These were not idle threats. Over the years in Segovia, some 47 members of the miners' union have been killed, according to the union's own records. But as strange as it may seem, the threats and the murders can sometimes desensitise people who are closest to them, inure them to the risks. And although this one was more direct, more explicit, it was nothing new. So they carried on. They continued to call on political leaders, other unions and social movements at home and abroad to support their campaign. They got the support of big league politicians who organised a debate in Congress, and they filed a last-minute legal injunction to try to stop the sale going through.
Atentaron contra uno de nuestros compañeros, John Jairo Zapata Marulanda, que le pegaron 5 impactos de balas desconocidos.
But then, gunmen shot one of the leaders 5 times as he was giving a workshop. He survived, but has never fully recovered. To this day, no one knows for sure who gave the order. Powerful politicians, local business elites, wealthy private investors and shadowy figures linked to the paramilitaries all had stakes in the sale of Frontino.
No te sabría decir con certeza. Lo único cierto es que las amenazas eran claras, que teníamos que renunciar y no seguir oponiendo a la liquidación y venta de la Frontino Gold Mines.
For his part, Dairo didn't want to put a name on who was behind the attempted hit or the threats. The only thing that is certain, he said, is that the message was clear. They had to stop opposing the sale of Frontino Gold Mines. From Insight Crime, this is The Shadow of El Dorado, a series about the intricate web of corruption, violence and complicity behind the gold trade in Segovia, and the story of how this once thriving Colombian mining town became a mafia stronghold. I'm James Bargent.
And I'm Matt Charles. In this episode, we'll be looking at when global capitalism came to town. This is episode 4. Meet the new boss.
We met Dairo in a library in Medellin, where he now lives after he was forced to flee Segovia because of the constant death threats.
Yo nací en el año 1971 en Segovia, Antioquia. Soy hijo de campesinos.
Dairo's story is classic Segovia. He told us how he was born in 1971 to a family of peasant farmers living in the rural part of the municipality. They had a small plot of land where they grew plantains, raised cattle, and panned for gold every now and again. When he was a young man, he left to study in a small town near Segovia. Then, in 1991, he got a job where most Segovian men of his age got a job, Frontino Gold Mines. Dairo was elected president of the Segovia chapter of the Miners' Union in 2009, making him responsible for representing around 1,500 Frontino miners. And he walked straight into a battle over the future of Segovia. At that time, Frontino was a wreck. It had been invaded by mine robbers known as machuqueros. Its machinery was in disrepair. Exploration of new fronts had withered away and its main mines were being worked by rudimentary operations run by shadowy subcontractors. Segovia had also divided into two bitterly opposed camps with very different ideas over what should be done about it. On one side was the sale camp, which included the government, the company administrators, and a section of the workers and pensioners tired of the whole tortured affair or looking for a personal payoff. They wanted to sell off the Frontino assets, then use the money to form a pension fund and pay off worker contracts. Dairo and the union, along with most of the Frontino workers and pensioners, were firmly on the other side. The Frontino is ours side.
Fijamos nuestra postura pública de que nosotros no estamos de acuerdo con que liquidaran la empresa y la vendieran porque la empresa Frontino Gold Mine o los bienes de la empresa Frontino Gold Mines pertenecían a los trabajadores y los jubilados porque se nos fue dejada.
As Dairo explained, and as we've explored previously, their argument was that Frontino had already been liquidated in the late 70s, and that as part of the terms of that liquidation, its assets were supposed to have been transferred to the company's creditors, the workers and the pensioners. This argument was based on a document from 1979, the Act of New York. It was an argument that had been accepted by numerous Colombian courts. But the upshot was, despite being told by 4 different judges that they'd won and that the company belonged to them, in the end, a constitutional court declared the rulings void. The workers and pensioners lost, and Frontino was liquidated and put up for auction. Proposals came in from interested parties in Colombia, Chile, Peru, Mexico, Canada, and the US. But by the time the deadline for pre-qualification for the auction came around, not a single company was left. They were left facing an auction with no bidders. And that was when the government of President Álvaro Uribe got involved, reaching out to some old friends.
Could you tell me a little bit about Frank Giustra before and after meeting President Clinton?
The biggest change in my life since meeting him was that I decided to dedicate more of my time to philanthropy and less to business. And I still love business, trust me. I love the business world. I love making money, no, but also I love growing things, watching things blow.
The sale of Frontino would involve insider trading of economic and political power, and a convergence of Colombian and global elites, the genesis of which can be traced to a chance meeting between the billionaire Canadian businessman Frank Giustra and Colombian President Álvaro Uribe, a meeting that was set up by former US President Bill Clinton.
Having spent a lot of time with him, he just inspired me. He's just an amazing human being.
That's cool.
Giustra, a white-haired, fair-skinned mining and entertainment mogul, owns numerous companies, including Lionsgate Entertainment and a slew of natural resources businesses. He is also a prominent philanthropist. And in 2005, he lent Clinton one of his private jets on the condition Clinton let him fly with him. Soon afterwards, Giustra donated $31 million to the Clinton Foundation. 2 years later, the pair launched the Clinton-Giustra Sustainable Growth Initiative, which was bankrolled by $100 million of Giustra's cash and a pledge to donate half of all his future profits from investments in the mining industry.
Well, we're beginning in Colombia because, first of all, there is a need there. As you know, the country has suffered for many years because of the conflicts generated by the narco-traffickers and the guerrillas and the paramilitaries. And because the government wants us to come, we're following the same rule here we follow with the AIDS Project and with our development initiative.
It was during these first whirlwind bromance months that Clinton introduced Giustra to then-President Uribe. Uribe was a friend and ally of Clinton, whose government had begun the flow of billions of dollars in military aid that would go on to bankroll Uribe's war against leftist guerrillas.
We won't go anywhere we're not welcome. We want to be invited.
Giustra had several more meetings with Uribe, and soon after, he began to pour funds into ever more investments in Colombia, financing oil companies, coal companies, logging companies, and infrastructure projects. In many of these ventures, he worked closely with a small core of investors. Above all, one man, Serafino Iacono, a Venezuela-born tycoon who's a personal friend of Uribe and a major donor to his political campaigns. So in 2010, when the Uribe government found itself bereft of possible buyers for Frontino, it turned to Giustra and Iacono's cabal of investors. They put in a bid through Zandor Capital, a newly formed corporate entity registered in the fiscal paradise of Panama. In return for the Frontino assets, Zandor offered to pay approximately $200 million to pay off the pension debt. And on March 29, 2010, their offer was accepted. That was when Dairo and the union launched their last-ditch political and legal efforts to halt the deal going through. Weeks later came the email telling them to stop opposing the sale of Frontino to Zandor, and then came the attempted hit on his colleague. Following the attack, the union leaders were whisked away on a helicopter to Medellin for their own protection. The deal was finalised in August 2010, just over a month after the hitman had pumped 5 bullets into the union leader. While Dairo and the others were hiding in Medellin, the network of investors and business partners working with Giustra and Iacono were preparing to move their business to Segovia. With the sale of Frontino, Segovians were promised the capitalist dream that the developed world dangles in front of the developing. Foreign investment that converts into local prosperity and stability. What they got was the empty shell that often lies behind that dream. A maze of holding companies and indecipherable share trading on one end, and a tangle of outsourcing and subcontracting arrangements on the other. The old patriarchal model of a de facto company town had been swapped for its modern equivalent, aggressive and dynamic shareholder capitalism. But in the end, the result was the same. Cheap blood gold, wrenched from a poor corner of a developing nation for use in the most sophisticated technology on the planet or as adornments for the rich and famous. Zandor Capital soon became Gran Colombia Gold Corp, thanks to a complicated series of mergers and acquisitions. That process saw the Frontino assets bounce around between 3 supposedly distinct companies, but behind them was a group of core investors and executives who personified how, instead of a capitalist dream, Gran Colombia was really more of an oligarchic joint venture. Giustra's initial investment at the time of the sale is not public information, but by 2016, when it crossed Canada's threshold for reporting requirements, he'd secured a 25% stake in the company. He's also been listed as a strategic advisor to the board in the company's various incarnations. His wingman, Serafino Iacono, was listed as the Gran Colombia executive co-chairman, and he's been on the company's board of directors ever since.
Segovia is very much developed. We operate 3 of 23 mines in a concession that is truly a private property in Colombia, a rarity. We own the mineral rights and the land, so we don't pay any royalties.
Then there was Maria Consuelo Araujo.
So let's talk about your role as Chief Executive Officer for Gran Colombia Gold. What's new and exciting at the company?
Well, everything is exciting. It's a vibrant sector, growing. Everything is to be done. And what we want to develop is the way that responsible mining can be done.
Right.
Araujo did not have much of a history in mining. She was, however, one of Uribe's closest political allies. In fact, she'd been foreign minister in his administration. Until, that is, she was forced to resign when her father, 2 brothers, and a cousin found themselves neck-deep in scandal because of their alleged ties to paramilitary groups.
People are concerned about safety, about risk in our country. And when you compare the numbers, when you compare the indicators, you see that Colombia is a very safe country, and the only risk you have is to wanting to stay.
Araujo continued working at the company until 2015. By then, her political rehabilitation complete, she joined the cabinet of the mayor of Colombia's capital city, Bogotá. Other Uribe allies joined the board as well. For instance, his campaign manager during his presidential run was a director on the company board for 2 years. And then there was Hernán Martínez Torres.
La verdad que las políticas establecidas por el gobierno del presidente Uribe han sido lo suficientemente fuertes y de muy alta receptividad por la sociedad colombiana.
You can hear him here selling Canadian investors on the business-friendly nature of the Uribe government.
Que están corriendo para las próximas elecciones. están manteniendo el mismo discurso político.
Martinez had been the Uribe administration's Minister for Mining and Energy and had played an active role in the whole Frontino process. He left his post on August 7th, 2010, 2 weeks before the deal was finalised. Then, on June 10th, 2011, he was named to the Gran Colombia Board of Directors. According to the company's 2021 annual report, Martinez Torres was still a director on the board and owned shares in the company. But he passed away in December 2023.
We contacted as many people as we could find to try to get the other side of the story of the sale of Frontino, to ask them about the simmering violence and murky deals, and to find out why, among other things, did all these Uribe administration officials become part of the upper echelon of the new company. Among them were Frontino administrators during the liquidation, members of the advisory board on the sale, the presidential advisors on Frontino, rival unionists, and representatives of the pro-sale workers and pensioners. None of them responded to our inquiries. But Gran Colombia Gold was more accommodating.
We went to their office in the posh Medellin neighbourhood of El Poblado. The offices were bright and modern, and a press officer flitted around us as we met José Noguer, who's been Vice President for Corporate Affairs since 2012.
Mi nombre es José Ignacio Noguera, soy el vicepresidente de Asuntos Corporativos de Gran Colombia Gold.
José was amiable and personable. He told us how when Gran Colombia arrived in Segovia, they found a mess.
No nos encontraron muchas cosas, entre ellas trabajo infantil, prostitución infantil, lavado de dinero, operación de bandas criminales en el área, minería ilegal.
Segovia was plagued by all manner of social ills, he said. Child labour, prostitution, militias, money laundering and illegal mining. The mines themselves were invaded by hundreds of machuqueros, the gangs of mine robbers, and operations had been run into the ground.
En el año 2010 invitan a Gran Colombia Gold a que participe dentro de la licitación para la compra de los activos de esa compañía.
The Gran Colombia people were invited into all this by the government to revive a process that was failing and failing badly, he explained. The deal was struck with one thing in mind: paying off the debts to workers and pensioners. That was what the $200 million was for.
Es importante tener en cuenta que el proceso de liquidación de Frontino fue un proceso que manejó el gobierno de Colombia, la Superintendencia de Sociedades, no Gran Colombia. Gran Colombia Gold fue sencillamente el comprador.
The Frontino struggle and everything it involved, not only the workers' claims to ownership of the company, but also the paramilitary violence. Really, that had nothing to do with them, he said. Those were issues for the government. But José's demeanour changed when we started asking tougher questions. When we asked about the threats against the union during the sale negotiations and the attempted murder of one of the union leaders, he gave me short shrift.
No tengo conocimiento, pero la recomendación es lo mismo. Tienen que presentar las denuncias ante la autoridad.
I don't know anything about that case, he said, but my advice to them is to report anything like that to the authorities. What about the granting of top jobs to current and former government ministers, like Araujo and Martinez, we asked? There's no denying the company's involvement in those decisions. Was that not a conflict of interest?
Gran Colombia Gold, como una empresa canadiense que cotiza en bolsa, actúa bajo altos principios y estándares de ética e integridad.
José replied that the company has the highest ethical standards. And besides, Araujo wasn't actually in government when they gave her the job.
Pero el ministro todavía estaba en el gobierno durante las negociaciones, ¿no? Y después pasó a la empresa.
When we pushed back on Martinez, who was Minister of Mining until just months before the sale, José got snappy.
Por eso, pero si no hay acusaciones con respecto a conflictos de intereses, no te podría dar.
They've received no complaints about conflicts of interest on the matter, he said, and that is that.
Ex empleados de la liquidada Frontino Gold Mines continúan sus protestas en las principales calles de Segovia. Aseguran que la empresa...
Gran Colombia arrived pledging stability and employment after a decade of near-constant turmoil. But within months, those promises seemed hollow. Hundreds of workers had lost their jobs, the town was shut down in a general strike, and the miners began battling police on the streets.
Pues antes de ser liquidada, la Frontino manejaba 1,400 empleados.
Working in the Frontino mines at the time were Jorge Sepúlveda and Carlos Durango, aka Pelo Mula or Donkey Hair. We met the brothers in episode 1 at Las Brisas mine. We caught up with them at the mine to ask what it was like.
Luego pasé a trabajar con estrategias y minas dentro de la misma empresa.
After the sale, Jorge started working with the Gran Colombia subcontractors, then landed himself a position as a direct employee. But he lasted just 2 months, he said, before he was fired with no warning.
Lo último que me dijeron a mí fue que renunciara al sindicato voluntariamente.
The management called him in, he said, and they told him if he wanted to keep his job, he had to resign from the union. And Jorge did, he resigned. But within a month, he'd lost his job anyway. Many others told us similar stories.
Pues una de las razones fue esa, porque siempre nos decían que para ellos tener la hoja de vida limpia era no ser sindicalistas.
The company management always said that having a clean record meant not being a unionist, Jorge told us. Jorge's brother, Pelo Mula, also didn't last long.
Ya ahora llega Gran Colombia con estrategia divina y nos va a coger. ¿Y qué pasó? Ya los pagos fueron quincenales.
When the company slashed his and other workers' pay and benefits, they downed tools and went on strike, he said. The company responded by firing them.
Yo trabajé con Julio Erazo, con Mazora.
Pelo Mula, though, was soon back working underground, this time for the contractor who today runs most of Gran Colombia's mines. His name, Julio Erazo, the same demobilized paramilitary we heard from last episode, who'd once worked side by side with Macaco. The new era of Gran Colombia looked very similar to what had come before it. Pelo Mula would walk away from that job as well, not over pay disputes or union activity, but out of fear for his life. The next round of the mining wars had begun. That's next time on the Shadow of El Dorado.
This series was the product of 8 years of investigation and on-the-ground fieldwork. This sort of work can be slow and painstaking, and it can be dangerous. It can also be expensive. If you want to help Insight Crime continue to produce in-depth investigations and analysis of organised crime, you can make a donation at insightcrime.org. If you want to dive deeper into the story of Segovia and blood gold in Colombia, head to our website at insightcrime.org. There you can see videos and photos of the scenes described in interviews with key characters, explore documents laying out the paper trail we uncovered during our investigation, and delve deeper into some of the stories and people mentioned in this podcast. The Shadow of El Dorado is an Insight Crime podcast produced with La No Ficción. It was reported and written by me, James Bargent, and produced by Matt Charles. Additional sound recording for this episode by Christian Carmona Cardona. Script editing was by Stephen Dudley and Tatiana Lozano, with the help of Elisa Roldan. Stephen and Elisa are the executive producers of the series. Sound design and editing for this episode by Jairo Pineda, and our graphic designer is Isabella Soto. Fact-checking by Alejandra Rodriguez. Additional research for this episode was done by Christopher Newton.